Hi, everyone. We're just waiting another minute just to allow a few more people to come in from the lobby. If you have your mic on, if you don't mind just muting yourself. Unless you have a question, of course. And this will be recorded as well. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody for joining us today. We will be admitting people in as people come in. We do ask just be mindful to mute yourself unless you do have a question. Also, if your camera is on, if you'd like to go ahead and turn your cameras off as well, and unless you want to, wave and say hi to us. So welcome and thank you for joining us today for an overview of the Title IV Part A grant. My name is Layla Brewer and I'm joined today with my colleague Lee Bowling and with Thelma Hawkins, who is the budget manager at KDE. For those of you that are new to working with Title IV Part A program, to those of you that have worked with the program for a few years, we hope this training will give you an overview of the grant requirements and suggestions on how to run an effective Title IV Part A program. We've scheduled 2 hours for the training to allow time for questions and have a 10-minute break built in a little bit past halfway through the presentation to give people a chance to step away and stretch. This training is mostly the same that was done last fall. So if you joined us last year, this will be a refresher of the requirements and will also provide time for questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be going over the GMAP application as well. We will be dropping links to resources in the chat throughout the presentation for your reference. The first resource that we will be dropping in is I'm going to put in the chat the Title IV Part A District Coordinator Handbook, and this is available. It should be in the chat now. This is available
it's so crazy.
On the Title IV Part A webpage.
All right. Well, thank you.
So before we begin, there is a little housekeeping with the use of Teams for today's webinar. If you're using the Teams app, your toolbar will be located in the upper right of your screen, and if you have joined via the browser, it will be located in the bottom center of your screen. The toolbar showing on the side should match the one in your Teams app. The red button on the left shows that the webinar will be recorded and displays the amount of time that has lapsed. Everyone's camera has or should be disabled except for those who are speaking. So that way you don't have to worry if your camera's on. If your camera does not have a line through it, you'll want to click on the camera to turn it off. The second icon is for the mic. So for those of you that are unmiked, please mute yourself or mute yourself so that way it's not distracting to others while we're speaking. There's also a raise hand button. So if you have a question, please raise your hand so that way we can answer when we are going over different sections. Number 5 is the chat bubble. So if you have a chat, you can put it in there as well. 6 shows your colleagues. And number 7 is to hang up for if you are leaving. I do see Matt Bell says he can't hear anyone. You may want to check that your speaker is on. It looks like he's coming back in, so hopefully that will fix the issue.
Hopefully that fixed it for him.
Okay. We are offering ELA credit for those participating. If you have entered into the meeting following the instructions sent you via email, this creates an electronic sign-in log. It captures your name and time you logged into the training and the time you logged out. You must participate in the entire training in order to receive ELA credit, just like if you're an in-person event. The second requirement is to complete a brief survey at the end of the meeting to provide us some feedback to help us in the future. So I'm going to now pass things over to Lee.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Layla. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about today is stakeholder engagement. And this is the first section of the GMAP application of the program administration. And this is where you will meet with all the members of your stakeholder group periodically to evaluate the Title IV Part A program, and then to evaluate the activities that are supported with Title IV. This is a sample of the program administration in GMAP. And you will check which members are involved in your stakeholder group. In the narrative box, you will list specifically about your meetings. The narrative should reflect how the meetings are going to be conducted, such as the platform. Are they going to be online? Are they going to be in person? And also too, about the frequency. How often are those meetings going to take place? How many times per year? And most importantly, how will those meetings be documented, and how will the attendees be documented as well? All of that should be in the narrative. It is important to remember that all members of the group should be given the opportunity to participate in the meetings. And then at the bottom of this page, you will see how do you plan to distribute the funds. Most select with the greatest need that is identified by the LEA. The stakeholder group is unique to each school district and the members depending on the size of the district. Groups to be included in your stakeholders should be parents and families, students, local area leaders, district and school level educators, behavioral health professionals. All members of the group should be invited and given the opportunity to provide their input and their feedback. It is also a good idea to consider other ways rather than just in person for meetings, because you may need to respect social distancing. Maintaining all documentation for each meeting is important. Some meetings may be held via conference call or by a digital platform, if in-person meeting is just not available. Meetings should be promoted with some advance notice, so everyone has the chance to add it to their schedule so that they can attend. You may even want to consider advertising your meeting on social media or even in a newsletter. Meetings should occur actively and involve all the members of the group. If there's already an event scheduled at your school or location, then perhaps consider holding a stakeholder meeting on that same day, since some of the attendees may be coming to that location already, like for a parent-teacher conference or for an upcoming sporting event. And also consider staggering meetings to different days and times. That may allow more people to attend each one of the meetings. Stakeholder consultation and stakeholder engagement, those are components of consolidated monitoring. And it's important that you have the documentation for all of those meetings and your attendees. It's important that the documentation accurately represents all the members that have attended the meetings, including your student representatives. The meetings should occur periodically throughout the year, reviewing all the Title IV Part A supported activities and the objectives. There should be documentation regarding the agenda, the sign-in sheets, the meeting minutes, and how members were invited to the meeting. please remember that this is not just a one-time, once a year meeting. These meetings should be ongoing throughout the year. Okay, let's take just a moment and check and see if we have any questions about stakeholder consultation. I don't see any at the moment, so let's pass it to Layla, and she's going to review the needs assessment for us. Layla?
Okay, so in ESCA section 4106D, districts that receive $30,000 or more in funds are required to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment at least once every 3 years to evaluate the district's needs in student access to well-rounded educational opportunities, learning conditions that cultivate a safe and healthy learning environment, and professional learning in the use of maximizing and enhancing the use of educational technology. So there are some things we look for when reviewing the needs assessment, since this is the foundation for the application. The program description and budget build off the needs identified in the needs assessment. In some reasons, the needs assessment may be returned is for vague information and a lack of district data for the targeted area in the application. Also for unclear information, information is old or is outdated data past the 3-year requirement, or the dates aren't within the relevant time frame. We are looking for a concise summary of the needs assessment to include that data in this section of the application, and the district will just want to maintain documentation of the needs assessment in case of a monitoring visit. You'll want to also make sure that the activities that you select that you're funding with Title IV-A funds do align and also focus on getting to the root cause of the identified need. So this flow chart, and I'm going to pop a link here in the chat. So this flow chart here demonstrates how the needs assessment process should go when evaluating needs and determining how to best utilize funds. So the district will review available data like surveys and availability of services, then look at the needs, gaps, and challenges related to Title IV, allowable activities like programs or resources, and next explore best practices to address the needs, gaps, and challenges identified. Then select an intervention or activity to address the identified need. And finally, leveraging funding and exploring partnerships with outside agencies. Stakeholders should be included throughout the process. So this flow chart is available in the Needs Assessment Planning Guide. That's what I dropped into the chat, and it's also on the Title IV Part A webpage as well. So this is something you can reference in the future. So once you've gone through identifying the needs and the process to determine challenges and available resources, then you'll look at what inputs and activities will address the need and may be supported with Title IV-A funds. So you'll want to think about the ultimate goal or outcome of implementing the activity. So what are the outputs, intermediate outcomes, and long-term outcomes? So when thinking through the outcomes, the district will want to look at their plan for assessing the program for effectiveness with those outcomes in mind. So even if the district does not conduct a comprehensive needs assessment, so the district may have less than $30,000 of funds, the district should still determine what the outcomes will be from implementing the Title IV Part A program and how they plan on evaluating the effectiveness of the program. So this here is the needs assessment page that is in the GMAP application. I apologize if it's a little small, but we did want to just have some screenshots on here. So once you've gone through the process of identifying your needs in the 3 areas of the grant, you'll complete a survey or you'll complete a summary of the information in GMAP application in accordance with ESCA section 4106D. A needs assessment must be conducted at least every 3 years. So in the application, you must include the date of the assessment, and the date must be within 3 years of the date of the original application submission. This means either the day the data was reviewed and collected, the day the assessment was conducted, or the district received the assessment report. So for example, if the district is using a Kentucky Center for School Safety assessment, it could be the date the assessment was conducted. If the district surveyed teachers on their professional learning needs around educational technology use, it could be the date the district met to analyze the survey data to identify the area of need. Many districts are using just their CDIP as their comprehensive needs assessment, and sometimes that CDIP may not capture all areas within the grant, like student mental health and safety. So we do allow districts to use other needs assessments that they use to collect data and information in some of the other areas of the grant. Next, the district needs to describe the results of the needs assessment in the application. And we want the narrative that describes the data analyzed and the need that was identified. So unique district data is needed in this box to allow or to show that the district did look at their needs and showed an area that needs improvement. So this wouldn't be general data or information, but we're really looking at your school and district data, stakeholder input, survey information, and other information that was used to determine the needs to develop the plan. So does anyone have any questions on the needs assessment requirement right now? And you can raise your hand or you can unmute. Okay, next I'll pass things along to Thelma.
Okay.
Try to get students attached. I love this. You guys are on top of your game here. Love it. All right. Any questions? Any more questions on this managed students page here? Let's talk about the content now. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint for this.
Will everyone make sure they're muted, please? Thanks. Okay. One question that usually comes up every year and throughout the year is, what can I spend my Title IV funds on? Or you can plug in Title I, Title II, any federal grant. And so it usually starts with, it starts with the needs assessment. As Layla just talked about, you need to, regardless of what your federal program is, you should be conducting a needs assessment to determine what your uses of the funds will be for the upcoming year. And when you're looking at planning those activities, there are two types of costs that you should look at. There are allowable costs and budgeted costs. So allowable costs are those activities that are allowable to provide services for your program. And then budgeted costs are those costs that you actually budget. So with and they seem like they're the same, but they're not, because you could have an allowable cost that's an allowable activity, yet you have not budgeted for it in your GMAP application. So you need to keep that in mind, because we've had questions that have come up during monitoring where it was an allowable cost. However, it didn't align what was in a needs assessment and what was in the GMAP application. So just keep that in mind, that you have allowable costs and budgeted costs. All of your costs should align with what's in the Uniform Grants Guidance in a 2 CFR Part 200. And so that's the high level allowability regarding costs. Then the next guidance document that we use to determine costs is Edgar and Chart for the Education Department General Administrative Regulations. And then the third guidance document that's used to determine costs is the Title IV Part A law. So it's never, it's hardly ever just a simple question. We have to look at all of those guidance documents when we are looking at applications, reviewing budgets, and questions come in. If you have a question that comes into the program office, or it may come into the budget office, usually we're speaking hand in hand and keeping each other in the loop. So those are three guidance documents that we use to determine costs, but just keep in mind the allowable versus budgeted, and we do know that you can't, you try to budget everything, all the activities, but plans change. And so just be mindful in making sure that if it's a significant activity that you want to plan and it wasn't previously in your GMAP application and it's it's an allowable cost, I would just err on the side of caution and revise your application to include that. And if you're not sure about if whether or not you need to revise that GMAP application, you should email your Title IV Part A program consultant. Okay, next slide, please. Supplement, not supplant. So in short, this is the Title IV law states that funds must be used in a supplemental nature and not to supplant. So as with all federal funds are to be used in supplemental in nature to provide additional service beyond what you're already providing. And then the not supplant is you cannot use federal funds to replace activities or services that were previously provided with non federal funds, with your local or state dollars. So in the times of budget reductions and that in the past, during the times of budget reductions, you need to be mindful of, just because you don't have local funds or state funds anymore, you just can't switch that fund source to federal. There are lots of things things you need to take into consideration when making that determination. And this is, it usually takes a lot of back and forth conversation to make sure that, you're not supplanting these funds. Layla, do you want to give a couple of examples of things or questions that have come up regarding supplement, not supplant?
Yeah. So, for example, I know when Title IV came out, we had, SROs was a big area where districts were looking for funding. So, if the SRO was paid out of state or local funds, then it could not be then paid out of Title IV-A funds. In the last couple years, we've had some changes to the state budget, to where I think mental health counseling was provided with some state funds, and I believe is around $43,000 for, I think, mental health counseling and supports. And that may not be enough money to really fund a full position. So districts were using their state funds, and then they were supplementing the remaining cost of that salary with Title IV-A funds to kind of pay for that full position. Also around I believe there were some school security funds that were available too, and each district got a certain amount of state funds to provide updates to their school security. So they had to utilize those fund sources first before using Title IV-A funds. And we just asked for that clarification within the applications, just to ensure there wasn't a supplant issue happening.
Okay, thanks. Next slide. So in determining allowable costs, you should always keep in mind that costs should be reasonable, necessary, allocable, and documented. So reasonable. Your costs should be reasonable in nature. Just because you have the funds in the budget doesn't mean that you can spend an excessive amount on whatever the activity, planning, professional development. You need to look at the costs, make sure they're reasonable, they're aligned. The cost aligns with the with the activity that's planned or the training. One example I like to use, because we seem to get this a lot, is for instance, if there's a conference in California, and California is a high rate state, and you have the funds in the budget, and the district wants to send 6 people. And if registration is $800-900, and then your airfare could be another $600, $700, $800 dollars, I mean, the cost per person, if you look at the cost per person, I mean, you may have the funds in a budget, but is that really reasonable? So you may want to look at, who might be, which of the district staff may best benefit from really going to the training and then coming back and sharing and doing a trainer. So maybe instead of sending 6, you may only send 2. So just because you have funds in a budget, just be mindful of that. Also, I'm thinking of when purchasing maybe technology or something to that effect. Just because you may have the funds in a budget, you just need to look at what's the purpose, what are you trying to accomplish, and look at the means. Is it what's going to provide the most impact? Just because you have an excessive number of Chromebooks, laptops, or whatever, and some districts may say if they purchase Chromebooks, well, they just want to have extra on site. But is that really? It could be reasonable, but you just be mindful and try to use your best judgment around those costs. Also necessary, the necessary, the activity, the professional development that ties to the grant must be necessary and align with what you put in your plan. So if your needs assessment says that you need you want to use a particular type of curriculum, and your needs assessment showed that, well, then that would be necessary. You want to make sure you have the documentation that's associated with the cost. And because during monitoring visits, when the consultants are out, they will be looking at those types of things. Also allocable, you need to make sure that whatever or the purchases tie back to the grant of the implementing. So lots of times districts may share the costs with other programs, whether it may be federal or state. So you need to, if it's Title IV is providing a professional development, maybe around safe and healthy, a district-wide professional development, and maybe around the safe and healthy component. So you maybe want to look at proportionally what would Title IV pay. So, the district needs to look at that and make sure it's equitable to what the other programs will pay. And as I mentioned, documented. You just need to make sure all of those costs are documented uh, and tie back to your needs assessment, and they are in your plan. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, going back to when I started off, it's can I purchase, and what can I use my Title IV funds for? We get that question all the time, and if it comes to me, I usually say, well, what do you have in your GMAP plan? What did you put in your GMAP application? So it's always that cost, that purchase should always tie back to your GMAP plan, what you put in your application, and then what your application is the outcome based on your needs assessment. Your needs assessment of what was conducted to determine what the activities are or what is the need for the upcoming year for Title IV. So you say, can I purchase? So can I purchase software? And then the need. Was it in your needs assessment? And so if the answer is yes, well, then you put that in your plan. You work with either your finance officer or whatever it is to determine what is the cost. You get your quotes for the software that you plan to purchase, and you put that in your budget. And once again, make sure all your costs are reasonable, necessary, and allocable and supplementary in nature. But this is a good little chart to use that I think we developed this a year ago, but it's just easy because the first question is what can I use my Title IV funds on. And I always say what's in your plan, and then it's what was the outcome or what was determined based on your needs assessment. So just make sure all costs align with what's in your budget. And I know the one thing is, um, everyone always says we can't budget everything for everything, and we understand that. But as I mentioned previously, if it's something significant in nature, you should revise your GMAP application. And we do not want you to revise your GMAP application every time you make a change in munis. Okay, next slide, Layla. Okay. So this slide, it just provides just some of the common activities that are line items that have been allowed and districts have budgeted for in their GMAP application, but we'll focus on the non-allowables. And I would like to focus particularly on the field trips and entertainment, because at the end of the school year, we find this more districts are wanting to take, want to have field trips. And so field trips, if they're instructional in nature, field trips are allowable. However, field trips to amusement parks or water parks or things of anything that is entertainment would be considered entertainment is not is not allowed. That's not allowed. And also meals, we can't pay for meals for if you're having a district-wide professional development or something. Meals cannot be provided in any construction or renovation or repairs. That is not allowed. I know that initially at the early years of Title IV, the consultants received quite a few questions around installing. I think it was some kind of security doors or reinforcements. Layla, do you want to chime in on that? And so any type of construction is not allowed.
Yeah, so I think initially we were getting questions around, like bollards, the things to keep cars from driving into buildings, putting those in, some questions around playground equipment and building that, and like actually doing physical changes to the building to provide some sort of additional security measures. So we had to look at all of that stuff, and those aren't allowable just because those are like permanent changes to the building and structures. So we do have to look at anything that may involve those types of expenses and costs, because they're not allowable for any federal program.
Right. Okay, thanks, Layla. Another one is at the end of the year, we've had the question about gift cards, and this is amongst not just Title IV, but several federal programs, gift cards as an incentive for students. So gift cards are not allowed, not for students, not as door prizes for PDs. So just gift cards in general, no. So just keep that in mind. That is not allowed. Okay, next slide, Layla. The funding matrix, everyone should be familiar with the funding matrix. It's the document that we have on the website with all the object codes for all federal programs, federal and state programs, which tells you which object codes are allowed and unallowed under each program. For some districts, I mean, each district has their own way of how they want to code things. And so, we may get the question, how should I code this? And I always say, talk to your finance officer, because they know best, because they may code things a certain way for tracking purposes. They may be tracking, they may have to track things, purchases in a certain manner. So I always say, this is what I think, but follow up with your finance officer, because you never know if your finance officer may be tracking certain purchases in a certain manner. So it's always best to work with your finance officer and make sure you have a good finance officer when you're working on your budgets. And as you know, the funding matrix is updated each year, and we usually keep through the current year and 2 past years posted on the website. Next slide, Layla.
And I also just put in the chat a link to the where you can find that federal funding matrix, the federal grants page. So if anyone is wondering what it is, since it was updated this year.
Okay, and so to recap, your budgeting and your planning starts with your need assessment to identify, the strengths, the weaknesses, and whatever data you've used from the previous year to determine how you're going to be moving forward. And based on that needs assessment, you're going to plan your activities. You're going to base your GMAP application on those needed activities and budget those and align those and make sure those costs are reasonable, necessary, allocable, and also supplementary in nature. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay.
This is me. So does anyone have any questions for Thelma before we start talking about use of funds? Okay, and at any point you can always pop questions into the chat as well. So we're going to kind of go over the use of funds in the 3 areas. So the first area is the well-rounded education section, and this section is used to provide an enriched curriculum and educational experiences to all students. So LEAs can use funds for a program or activity that supports student access to and success in well-rounded educational activities and experiences. Any programs and activities should be evidence-based and align with the results of the needs assessment. So some examples of how districts are using funds is I believe there's like a few districts that are using it for ACT boot camps to provide additional tutoring, test prep, and support to students before taking the test to help improve low test scores. Several districts are using funds to support ways to expand their STEM programs through purchasing materials like items for their robotics programs or to support summer STEM camps. Many districts have used funds to provide supplemental support to their career and tech programs, to expand resources, and to purchase supplemental items for the programs in the different career and tech pathways. We've seen districts support their gifted and talented programs to provide additional enrichment for that population of students. So there are a lot of different ways. So if you're looking at your plan and you're looking at, well, how can I utilize funds? These are just some examples. And of course, you can always contact us to kind of talk through ways in which to best support your students and to meet any identified needs in this area. Under Safe and Healthy Student section of the grant, there are a lot of ways that funds can be used, but the main ways we're seeing funds really is around supplemental SROs, trauma training, character education, and mental health services. Funds can also be used to support several other areas, because typically when we think of safe and supportive schools, we think physical safety and we think mental health. But it could also be used to support physical education programs, health and safety practices in school or athletic programs, as well as nutrition education. So districts have used funds to provide additional resources for counselors in order to better support students in many aspects of mental health. They've hired additional mental health counselors and supports and provided professional learning and supports for teachers in this area. Districts can also look at this section of the grant for professional development and programs around violence prevention and crisis management, training for staff on recognizing signs of human trafficking, Or also if you have a alternative education program within your district, you can also look at funds in all sections of the grant to support your alternative education programs to ensure equity and provide needed services to that population of students as well. The final content area where funds can be used is the effective use of technology section. And this section is mainly focused on supporting high quality professional learning for staff on how best to integrate technology in the classroom to use it effectively. So this can be done in a variety of ways to really support the needs of the teachers within the district based upon their grade level, their content area, and any professional learning needs related to using educational devices and programs within the classroom. Now, there is a special rule in this section of the grant where no more than 15% of funds in this section can be used for purchasing devices. And this 15% is not 15% of the entire grant amount. So when the budget's created, you'll want to be mindful not to go over this 15% cap in this section, as this would cause districts to have to transfer the cost to another allowable fund source. So technology may be purchased under safe and healthy students and well-rounded education sections only if that purchase is integral to the running of that Title IV Part A funded program. So for example, if a district is implementing a STEM program and purchasing robotics equipment for a program, then those items could be purchased under the well-rounded education section of the grant. But if the district's looking at purchasing general technology programs like Chromebooks, iPads, general software, those would have to be purchased under the effective use of technology section and adhere to that 15% rule. So an example of the 15% rule would be if a district's total Title IV allocation is $50,000, they decided to put $1,000 in effective use of technology, only $150 can be spent on technology hardware and software. The remaining $850 would need to be spent to support professional learning to enable the effective use of educational technology. Since the main focus of this section of the grant is around professional learning and using existing technology, the Title IV grant is not the grant the district will want to use for those general technology purchases. Christy Bush asked, so for the total technology piece, only 15% of that amount can be used for purchasing technology. Yes, that's correct, Christy. So it would be only 15% that's in there. Really, this is mainly focused on providing professional learning on using that technology. So funds can be used to support maximizing and enhancing the use of technology in a classroom through different professional learning opportunities, such as blended learning strategies, learning cadres, and online trainings on using various technology programs or devices. We've seen districts do where they've had like learning cadres where they've done book studies on blended learning strategies. And then, the group of teachers that are part of that may be meeting, to go over, what they're learning within the book, implementing it within the classroom, and then also having subs come in to cover the classes as those teachers may be observing each other on implementing what they're learning within the class. So that would be kind of an example of one way they're using funds. We're seeing a lot for Google training and certification. And one way to determine the needs for how to support teachers in those professional learning areas is to survey the teachers on what those educational technology needs are, request feedback if you have any sort of PLC meetings, just to see where it might be there's that teacher's knowledge and abilities, because as we know, technology purchases is a really huge expense for districts, and if teachers are only doing that one and done professional learning, they're not really picking up on a lot of those tricks and things on how to really integrate that within the classroom. So it's kind of going into that deeper dive learning. Other things to consider on how to use funds include subs to cover classes when teachers are at conferences, trainings, or observing other teachers using technology effectively in their classroom. It's part of their own professional learning plan. registration and travel with conferences and trainings, and consultant fees or stipends to provide that additional professional development. We've also seen some districts who are hiring additional technology coaches that are just there mostly to provide that additional professional learning on implementing that technology. I do need to add in that all professional development paid with federal funds must be sustained, intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom-focused. Funds cannot be used to support standalone, one-day, or short-term workshops. This should be for ongoing need to ensure the targeted goal is met, and any professional development paid for federal funds must be supplemental and cannot be for anything that is required by state or local law. So for any professional development that's provided with federal funds, and this isn't just Title IV, this is all federal funds, the district must make sure they follow the guidance in ESEA section 810142. So that was use of funds. I am going to talk about what that looks like and how to put it in the application, but I do want to see if anyone has any questions on use of funds and how to use funds. And of course, always add something in the chat if you have any questions. So this is the program description page in GMAP. It's small. We're just trying to get, what we can on the slide. So only expanded the effective use of technology section to talk about the information that needs to be included on this page of the application. So this is where you'll include the information on the programs and activities that will be supported with the grant, as well as any partnerships and how you plan on evaluating the program. So if the district receives $30,000 or more of funds, then all 3 sections must be completed and include the amount of funds that we spent to support the focus area under each section. And the amount entered needs to match the amount in the budget. And of course, any programs or activities that are listed in this section does need to align with what you put in your needs assessment and also needs to align with the budget. So just be mindful of that when you're completing the application. So under the describe the activities section, you'll want to describe the plan for how funds will be used to address the identified need. So under this section, so that would be, for example, like maybe you're looking at your scores in math and science, and you're wanting to implement a new program, a new STEM program. You would describe what that program is, what you plan to do with the funding. So that kind of gives us an idea of, are you purchasing, materials? Are you hiring a tutor? Are you hiring a salaried person? So you'll want to give as much detail as possible, because it allows us to know what fully is your plan and that is actually something that is thought out. Next, it talks about the partnerships, and it asks for you to list your district partners and how that partnership will enhance student achievement. So an example of this would be, so let's say a district is using funds to support a physical therapy training program as part of a career pathways. So what they would put in the application would be partnering with XYZ Physical Therapy Center to provide real-world experiences for students. So that lets us know the place that you're partnering with and what it's doing to really enhance student achievement. It's providing that real-world experience. Now, we understand you guys have a lot of partnerships you're working with, but we're really just looking at the partnerships that are supporting the Title IV funded program. So if you don't have an outside partnership to support the funded program, you would just put NA in the box. That just lets us know that, you don't need that outside help, that, whatever it is you're doing it within the district. Now, in the effective use of technology section, you'll see the question if funds are being used to purchase devices, and this ties to that 15% rule I just talked about. and the amount must not exceed 15% of funds in this section. So if you're using funds to buy technology in this section, you must select yes button and then the amount that will be spent on devices. So you actually, in this section, you have two places to put in amounts. The first amount is how much you're putting in here. So for the example I used earlier was like $1,000. So then if you selected yes, the second box would only have 150 listed in it, 150 or less. So we do compare those numbers to the budget, and there are oftentimes we've had to send it back because the numbers aren't quite matching what's in the budget. So the last grant requirement on this page is to list how the program will be evaluated, which Lee will discuss next. We don't seem to have any questions. Anyone have questions on what needs to go in GMAP here before he talks about activity evaluation? Okay, Lee.
All right, thank you. And as Layla mentioned, activity evaluation ties right into your program description in GMAP. And activity evaluation is also part of consolidated monitoring, where you need to review any activities or programs that are supported with your Title IV Part A funds. Activity evaluation is a requirement in accordance with 2 CFR 200.329. It is important for all districts to review and evaluate activities in order to determine effectiveness. All evaluations must be documented. Districts must set a baseline for goals for the activity and determine the benchmarks for how those evaluations are going to be measured. Based on the evaluation, decisions should be made of whether to continue the activity or to make some corrections and what should be some next steps. Districts should ask themselves questions about their activities that are supported with Title IV, like what are the expectations and how will you measure success? And when will the activity be evaluated? And if the activity is on target to meet the outcomes and the goals. And if they're not, then what should be altered or changed? For example, if a goal is to increase after-school tutoring, upon review, you determine that the goal is not being achieved. Perhaps change the activity, such to as maybe a different day or a different time, or maybe even a different instructor teaching the tutoring. Then measure for effectiveness again, review the data, and share that data with your stakeholder group and get their input and their feedback. And most importantly, do not just assume that the activity is going well. You must evaluate the activity's effectiveness. The evaluations need to occur periodically, perhaps even quarterly. This should not just be a one-time review, an annual review. It should be ongoing throughout the year. Maintain your documentation of those reviews and updates to the activity. Perhaps survey the members of your stakeholder group and ask for their feedback based on the most recent data that you have from that activity to determine the effectiveness and to make any improvements going forward. Compare your data to the benchmarks and see if you're on target to reach your goal. And also, do not be afraid to revise the activity. The whole purpose of the evaluations is to determine if any changes need to be made in order to reach the goal and objectives. If something is not working, change or modify that activity to increase in achievement. Document the meetings, the survey results, and any data that's related to the activity evaluation. As I mentioned, this is a component of consolidated monitoring, where we will ask you for the documentation related to your evaluations. This is also a tool, or we also have a tool on our website you can refer to when you're conducting an evaluation also. Do we have any questions, Layla, regarding the activity evaluation?
No, we had one about administrative costs that I answered in the chat, and I haven't seen any about activity evaluation.
Okay, I will pass it over to Layla for equitable services.
All right, thanks. So next we're going to talk about the equitable services requirement for Title IV Part A. And this is a requirement under ESSA or ESCA and is outlined in section 1117 and 8501. So we're going to talk about what it looks like for Title IV Part A. So providing services under Title IV Part A is similar to providing services under Title II. So if your district is running a Title II program, then there are a lot of similarities between the two. The district must offer to provide services to schools within the district boundary, which also includes homeschools. So this isn't like Title I, where typically the funds kind of follow the kid. This one would be those private schools that are actually within your physical district boundary. And the service amounts are calculated by taking the entire public school enrollment, the entire private school enrollment. And if the district has a private non-public school participate, then there will be a consultation between the schools to determine what services will be provided and upload the consultation packet into GMAP. And if changes are made after the original consultation on the type of services that are provided, then the district needs to document this and reasons why the change is being made. And depending upon, the amount of changes that are made, the application may need to be revised if there's a significant change in the services that are provided. And if you ever have any questions on this, you can contact us or David Melanti, who's the KDE Private School Ombudsman. Okay, so non-public school participation. So the district does need to maintain ongoing consultation and keep record of any communication between the district and the private non-public schools. The services provided should be based upon a need and allowable under Title IV-A, and all services must be supplemental, secular, and non-ideological. The district is the fiscal agent, so non-public schools cannot be reimbursed for any costs associated with the program. The district must maintain fiscal control of all services and resources, and items purchased are property of the district, not the private non-public school. So the district must maintain an inventory log of items purchased with federal funds for the private school use, and those non-consumable items do need to be labeled. Again, the district is the fiscal agent, so the district must make any purchases and provide services. Money doesn't change hands between the public and private schools. Amy Oates has the question, who completes the consultation packet? Is that something we need to give to the private schools, or did they receive the consultation packet? So that would be the district's responsibility. Typically, the district has one person who's named that liaison who works with the private schools. Those letters go out usually in about February, March, letting the private school know that there are federal funds available and what time to set up some sort of consultation. And then the district and the private non-public school kind of meet to discuss what may be going through with that consultation. And I'm actually going to drop a copy of the consultation packet into the chat for those of you to be able to see. So the Title IV-A section, let me put that in there. The Title IV Part A section is on pages 13 to 15 that kind of goes over what would be in that section. So this is all federal programs. So this is a screenshot of the district document library page in GMAP. So that the district has private non-public schools that are participating in any title program. Then the consultation packet needs to be uploaded into GMAP in the district document library. Under the FY22 folder, under Equitable Services and Documents, you'll see that FY22 Equitable Services Agreement. I have the arrow pointing to it there. This is where the packet should be uploaded. So there's one packet for all title programs that would be uploaded in this section. if you have those private non-public schools participating. So it'd be one packet per school. So, and also if the links aren't working when I post them in the chat, we will be emailing all of this out to you as well afterwards. And homeschools are to be consulted to, correct? Yes, so you do need to send out the letters to the homeschools to see if they're interested in participating. Oftentimes, you know, some of the smaller districts, the homeschools may not choose to participate because the amount is very small. And again, it's that communication to make sure they understand that they're not going to be receiving money, that they're going to be provided either resources or some sort of services or professional learning opportunities. So this is the Equitable Services page in GMAP. So if you do not have any private non-public schools that are participating, you just click that top box. It'll deactivate the entire page and you can move on. But if you do have private non-public schools participating, you will mark the assurances that consultation occurred and the services will be provided during the current school year. So while this is a 27-month grant, services to those private non-public schools do need to happen within that current calendar year. So that would be, you know, like starting now through, you know, like May, June, especially when it comes to some of those professional development activities. Some of those may occur in June. So it doesn't mean it's going to happen throughout the whole entire 27 months. The only time that there may be a change to that is if there's an extenuating circumstances to where services couldn't occur during that school year. So for example, this last year, maybe the private non-public school was planning on having some professional learning opportunities that were canceled. So then there may have had to been a change. So then that may have extended the amount of time for those services. But they do typically need to happen within that calendar year. You're also, you know, assuring that you're going to have that ongoing consultation, and that consultation also includes monitoring of the programs to determine effectiveness. And that's also listed in that sample consultation packet I added to the chat. It talks about how are you going to monitor that program, how are you going to see if it's effective. So in our monitoring visits, we do check on that as well. So we look at, okay, what was the private school, what was listed as the private school's need in that packet, what services that were determined to be provided, and then two, how's it being monitored to ensure that it's effective, to see if that's something that's going to continue the next year, or if it's something that maybe there needs to be a pivot or a change and do something else. The base amount listed in here is pre-populated with the grant amount. An administrative cost is 2% with Title IV, and this is taken off the top of the total grant amount, and it can be used for administrative costs in overseeing the grant, which may include overseeing the Equitable Services requirement. The total district enrollment and the private non-public school enrollment should be taken from the Declaration of Participation data that is collected and submitted to KDE. This is typically collected during the second month of the previous school year. I know the application on here says current school year. Typically the application comes out usually earlier. I know it came out late this year due to a lot of extenuating circumstances, but usually it comes out usually in May, if I'm correct, Thelma, is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. So GMAP will calculate the per pupil amount once information is entered in. And at the bottom, you'll need to include the individual student enrollment for each private non-public school. So if you have multiple, that number is going to be different than what you entered in at the top. So who you consulted with and the date of the initial consultation, and then describing the services, and those must match what's listed in that consultation packet and also align with the information in the private school budget. And of course, you know, we have any questions on any additional questions on Equitable Services? And of course, if you have any questions on this, me or Lee would be happy to help. Also, David Melanti, we do communicate with him quite a bit if we have certain questions we can't quite answer as well. Okay, and we're over halfway done, and it is time for a 10-minute break. So we will come back at about 2:45, and I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. Okay, so that's our timer that our break is up. So we're going to go ahead and start back up. We don't have too much left. So Lee, this is you.
All right. Thank you, Layla. I hope everyone enjoyed their break. Next, we're going to review program income. And program income comes from activities that are supported by Title IV Part A. And there are some different requirements for districts that generate some program income. Under the federal regulations 2 CFR 200.307, any program income generated from utilizing Title IV Part A funds must be tracked and reported. It's very important to maintain very detailed, accurate records of that income, as it could affect the federal award. Next, let's look at a couple of examples about how you might possibly generate some program income. Let's say that a district is using funds to support an arts program, and the students in that program end up selling their art that they created. And the money that was earned would be considered program income. Another example, if a district is supporting, let's say, a theater or music program or performance, and tickets were sold, well, tickets would be considered as program income. The selling of tickets to a theater or music production or band activity, or any activity that is supported with Title IV Part A funds, could generate some program income. And if that does occur, there are some additional reporting requirements that districts must submit to KDE quarterly. So please keep that in mind. If you have any activities that are supported with Title IV, where you may be selling tickets or generating some kind of income, you will need to track and report that income quarterly and report that to KDE.
Yeah, and
Layla,
I'll add too,
yes.
if you have, if you're kind of, curious to think, like, well, does mine earn program income or anything, please reach out to Lee or I. If you have questions on that. It doesn't really impact a lot of districts. It's actually just very few. So just be mindful of that. We do have separate forms that do need to be completed, as well, since this is a federal requirement, and this is for any federal program that earns income, since it is a 2 CFR requirement. Does anyone have any questions on this section? Next, it's Thelma to discuss time and effort.
Okay, so time and effort. Next slide. So time and effort is the I'm sorry, I lost sound for a minute. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry
Yes,
about
we
that.
can.
Okay, sorry about that. Time and effort is the accurate reporting of any personnel charges paid with federal funds. So for any employees whose salary is charged to a federal grant, regardless if you receive that grant from KDE, another state agency, or directly from the federal government, you should be maintaining time and effort records for those personnel charges that are supported by federal funds. And so the documentation should be based on the records and reflect the time that the employee actually works for the time. And those are CFRs that reference the time and effort requirements. Next slide. There are two types of certification, semi-annual and monthly. If for employees which are fully funded 100%, working solely on a federal grant, they are only required to complete a semi-annual certification every 6 months, and it needs to be signed by the supervisor and the employee. If there are multiple employees who are working 100% of their time on a particular grant, on one grant, well, then there is the form, the supervisor can complete one form and list the employees' names and their positions, and it will only, in that form would only need to be signed by the supervisor that has firsthand knowledge of the work that's being performed. The monthly certification is for those employees who are split between multiple fund sources. It could be multiple federal grants or a mix of federal and non-federal funds. And each of the, and on that monthly certification, it has to be supported by a personnel activity report which reflects the actual time spent working across each one of the fund sources. And I have a couple of samples that will be provided Layla, are you going to drop them in the chat now?
It is not going to let me drop in the documents
Okay.
in the chat, but we will email those out.
Okay. So there are two sample forms and that you can use. Now, districts should already be completing time and effort, but this is just a reminder about time and effort. And with all of the additional ESSER funds, the stimulus COVID relief funds that we've received the question, do we have to complete time and effort? And it's yes. And just as a reminder, it's for any federal fund source that you have, regardless of, like I said, if you came from KDE, another state agency, or you received the funds directly from the federal government. It is any federal fund source that you receive. And if you are charging personnel to that grant, well, then you must maintain time and effort documentation. Okay, next slide. And so just recap, all of the time and effort documentation should reflect the actual time that the employee worked and not what the schedule or what was budgeted. So if an employee worked 0.25 for, I'm going to use the monthly. So if a employee worked 0.25 on Monday, Tuesday on a federal grant, on Title IV, and then on maybe Thursday, Friday, they spent, I don't know, 0.5 of their time on Title IV. Well, then it needs to reflect that the actual time spent, which means maintaining calendars, developing a process, or having those employees develop a process to track that. You know, it might be a little tedious, but for those employees that are funded by multiple fund sources, well, then they do need to maintain the actual amount of time that was worked and not what was budgeted. Okay. Next slide.
Do we have any questions for Thelma regarding the time and effort?
So we had one about an MOA with a sheriff's department. So if you have an MOA, then that wouldn't apply here since that would be a separate contract. Is that correct, Thelma?
Correct. Since that is if a district subcontracts out to another entity to provide a service, because that entity is providing a service. So it's employees that are directly charged by the district.
Yeah, so since they aren't a district employee, technically, they're still an employee of the sheriff's office, then you wouldn't need to do a time and effort documentation if you had a memorandum of agreement.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Thelma.
Okay.
And speaking of documentation, that's our next section, documentation. And I know that's everybody's favorite is documentation. Everybody loves paperwork. But there should be some good documentation for every meeting that you have and every evaluation that you conduct. And a good thing to always keep in the back of your mind is that if it's not documented, then it did not happen. So you always have to make sure you document everything that you do. It's very, very important to maintain documents for all your meetings, your activity evaluations, your time and effort, your needs assessment, and your stakeholder consultations. If your district is selected for consolidated monitoring, having organized documentation can help streamline that process for the district and for us as well. There should be specific documentation for all of your meetings and all of your evaluations. In accordance with 2 CFR 200.334, districts should have a plan in place to maintain records for a minimum of 3 years. This will be reviewed and verified if you have to go through consolidated monitoring. This would include your financial records, it would include any supporting documentation, and it would include any records that are pertinent to the federal award. This would include things like your meeting minutes and your evaluations as well. So as I mentioned, it's very important to document every meeting that you have and maintaining a record of those meetings and have a plan in place about how to make sure they get documented properly. Perhaps consider having a designated person at each meeting to take the notes and to document what is discussed and by whom at every one of the meetings. Sign-in sheets will help to document who is attending the meetings, especially with their name and their title. And there should be a clear record of attendees, the agenda, and what is discussed at every meeting, and what kind of follow-up items need to be acted on as well. Now, does anybody have any questions over documentation?
So we do have a question from Kate about retired staff members hired on a contract to provide services. Will a time and effort log be needed? So I think that kind of depends upon how they're hired under the contract. If they're hired like to where they're still kind of that direct employee within the district, then it would need to be. If it's kind of like that separate type of contract, then it wouldn't. What we've seen in some instances where they've hired some people to provide tutoring is they've had like a tutoring log where all they have to do is they just write down, date, what they did and the amount of time worked, and just kind of kept that as a record as well. Thelma, do you have anything to add to Kate's question, or if I answered that correctly?
No, you are correct. So I know they use contract in the terms of, the district has a contract with the employee. The district signs a contract, but that person would be an employee of the district, and it sounds like yes, they would have to, unless that person is has like a consulting firm or business. So if she would like to clarify that. But if the district hired the person and they had to sign with that regular employee contract, well, then they would be an employee of the district and in turn would have to complete time and effort.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you have any follow-up questions, Kate, please reach out to us and let us know. Because I think next we have inventory with Thelma.
Okay. So inventory, any equipment or purchase with federal funds, must be inventoried according to federal statute. And once again, it goes back to any equipment that was paid for, that was reasonable, necessary, and allocable. An inventory log must be maintained. Most districts have an inventory log for insurance purposes, but you need to make sure there are certain requirements, certain elements of the inventory log which are required by federal law. You want to go next page, next slide, Layla. I think it's a couple of slides. This is just a, okay, this slide. So any equipment, the federal government does not quote a dollar amount. However, we have used the threshold of any purchases made, any single purchase made of $500 or more of tangible goods must be included on the inventory log, and all technology purchases, regardless of price, should be included on the inventory log. And so some of the elements that are required is a description of the equipment, the serial and model number, for the funding source. It has the federal award identification number. And for this, you can put the that number is listed on the award notification. So in your Title IV award notification, that federal award identification number is listed on the award notification. And those award Title IV on all of our award notifications are posted on the website. And also, if for equipment that the equipment must be maintained on the log until it's no longer usable, and then you would have a column. There's a column that where you would identify when that piece of equipment was disposed of. Also, for any resources that are purchased with federal funds, and you should be doing this with all of your federal programs, any resources, they should be labeled and tagged, just stating, purchased with Title IV funds, Title I funds, Title II funds. And so this is just a general requirement that is across all federal programs and not specific to Title IV. Okay, next slide, Layla. So the funding for funding, the Title IV funding is based on your proportional amount of your previous year Title I funds, and the statute states that no district can receive less than $10,000. Also, the intent to participate is released in late March or early April. And so all districts need to let us know if they're going to participate or join a consortium. And I think we do not, to date, we have not had any districts that decided that they wanted to form a consortium. And so, and as you're aware, all of our allocations and award notifications are posted on the website, and the grants are for the grant, just like most of our federal ESCA grants, are for 27 months. Also, there's no carryover limitation. So at the end of the first 15 months, there's no carryover limitation. For instance, like Title I, you can only carry over 15%, no more than 15% from year to year. So Title IV does not have any carryover limitation. And any communication regarding allocations, the intent to participate, that always comes out in a Commissioner's Monday email. However, we do know that most district staff are not included in that email. And if the program office, if a grant has something that's in the Monday email, they will send that out to their distribution list. So Layla and Lee will forward that, any information that is regarding funding or allocations, it will go out in the Commissioner's Monday email to superintendents and finance officers, and then Layla and Lee will in turn forward that to the Title IV district program contact so that they can be aware of the information and there's not a delay in them receiving that information.
Yeah, and I'll add to Thelma, and we do send that to you guys if your role changes or if you have someone new that comes in as a Title IV coordinator. We know we have several joining us today. Just please let Lee and I know that position has changed or there's someone else that you need us to add to our distribution list, because that's something we have to update manually. And unless we're notified by the district, we're not aware that someone may be missing communications or someone new is taking over the role. And with the carryover limitation, it does, state only amounts that are appropriate for efficient funds management. So that would be on the district to really look at what would be a reasonable amount to carry over. So you don't want to, keep funds just sitting there until the end of that grant running out with that 27 months. So just kind of be mindful of that when you're planning your spending as well.
Okay, so revising your GMAP application. Your GMAP application, maybe once it's approved, once it's given KDE consultant approval, the district may start a revision at any time. And so times when applications need to be revised, if there was a reallocation of funds, if KDE received an increase or decrease in their funding from the U.S. Department of Education, we will upload those new allocations into the system and you will need to go in and revise that application. Also, if the district makes any significant changes in the activities, which was previously approved, and I mentioned that earlier, you would need to go in and make a revision. Also, we do not want you to make a change in GMAP every time you make a change in Munis. We have always said, the GMAP to Munis alignment should be relatively close. If you have funds budgeted in personnel, and we know personnel is one where at some point in time you have positions that are vacant, and if you have an excess amount of funds that you're not going to spend, and you will need to move that maybe down to travel or supplies. And if you're talking about maybe, we always say use your best judgment. And if you're moving, I don't know, I'm going to say if you had one position could be 60, 70,000. That's a significant amount that, of funds you need to move from personnel into other categories or other categories of budget line items. And so you would need to make sure you submit a revision if that's what you plan to do in Munis, and you would need to update your GMAP application accordingly. Now, aligning your GMAP application after you have spent the funds is not a very good or wise thing to do. We have been running into that issue here a little lately, where districts have spent funds and they're submitting a revision after the fact, because there is a possibility there are some activities that the district has spent funds on that were not aligned or were not allowed, and we never want a district to be in a payback situation. So just email your consultant, talk about it. If you have any questions about any significant activities or changes. But I would say the district needs to, come up with a process. Say we will look at our Munis and GMAP alignment maybe at the end of each year or twice a year. Just come up with some kind of plan just to make sure it aligns I always say relatively close, because unless you at the end, you go back after you've even though your GMAP application was approved, you spent it the way that the funds were spent, and we, the only way it'll align if you go back after that point and then make changes in GMAP. We don't want you to do that. We don't want you to do that. If you spent the funds as you as they were budgeted in the approved GMAP application, and it's relatively close, well then that would be, that's good. But we do not want you to make a change in Munis every time you make a change in GMAP. Layla, anything you want to add about what you've seen during monitoring around that?
I think you basically hit on the main point, Thelma. Yeah, that's typical among all federal programs that we kind of see around that revision piece.
Okay. And then the process for this is just in general, the process about applications, because sometimes I know that sometimes there's a changeover in staff, in positions and everything, and maybe people are not aware, but at any point in time, you can go into GMAP and look at the status to see where it is. You can look at the consolidated, once your application has come to KDE, you can look at the, from your end, you can go to that consolidated checklist and see which sections have been approved or still waiting for consultant approval. But, once the district consolidated director completes the application, it goes to the finance officer for approval, and then your superintendent for approval. And then once the superintendent approves it, it is submitted to KDE. And one thing to keep in mind, there are several consultants throughout the agency that are reviewing the applications, and you have some consultants that have to review 2 sections of the application, and they work diligently to try to get those applications reviewed and returned. And for instance, you have some consultants that have to review, one consultant could have to review Title I and Title V, or Title I and Title I Part D, neglected and delinquent subpart 2. So you have a few consultants that have to review 2 different sections in the application, and it is time consuming. However, they do work diligently to try to get those applications reviewed and approved, or reviewed and returned back to the district so that you can make any necessary revisions. Okay.
Sorry, it's muted. So these are some additional considerations, and I did drop that earlier in the presentation. I did drop the funding matrix link into the chat just to make sure that the finance officer does have that non-competitive federal funding matrix for 21-22. We did update some of the codes that are allowable this year. I believe one of those codes that was allowable had to do with student wages. We got information from U.S. Department of Ed that if you're, like, let's say running a program like a career and technical education program, and there's like maybe some student wages involved with that, depending upon that activity, then it could be allowable. So we have updated the funding matrix with it, and I believe there are a few other codes just to kind of keep in mind. So it is always good to look at those annually, because we may get additional guidance from U.S. Department of Ed to where certain things may now be allowable. So when you are looking at those considerations, looking at, are there allowable codes, and in the budget where it asks for the narrative description, making sure that budget description is clear on what it is you're using funds for. So if you have a substantial cost amount, do you have enough information in there to justify the cost? So I know Thelma has used the example about travel. So if you're doing like some sort of a conference or something like that, putting in information for us to understand what it is you're planning on doing to justify the cost. So maybe you're looking at, sending your library media specialist from each school to a certain training or a conference. Well, if we see a high amount in the budget for travel, for us, we're going to just ask questions on what does that mean, who's going. So if you're able to provide that additional clarification, it does help us in reviewing the applications and keeps us from having to go back and forth, to get that clarification. Also looking to, if the code is open in GMAP, it should be open in Munis and vice versa. So making sure those codes do match up and checking for alignment between the approved plan in GMAP and what is in Munis, and regularly align the two. Also you want to make sure that the projects in Munis match those in GMAP. For the current application, this would be 552I are the codes for Title 4A. So there's Title 4 Part A, you have 552IS for safe and healthy students, 552IT for effective use technology, IW, and so on. If in 552IT, you'll want to remember that no more than 15% of funds can be spent on tech software or devices.
There are some common application revisions that we do see year after year. And one of those is the misalignment between the budget and the detailed Munis report. Now, as Thelma just mentioned, the Munis report should match the GMAP application for the codes and relatively closely match the amounts of funds allocated for those codes. Another revision that we see is the lack or absence of information on the application. For example, the narrative on the stakeholder consultation is not specific, or there's no specific district data on the needs assessment. There is also often revisions needed because there are inconsistencies between the needs assessment, the program description, and the budget. Those three areas should be in complete alignment. Each budgeted item must be directly correlated to the needs assessment if the district is required to complete that. Another area that requires a revision is due to unallowable expenditures. Some items are just not allowed to be paid with Title IV Part A funds, like Thelma was mentioning earlier: meals, construction, supplanting issues, or an exorbitant amount for a particular item. Sometimes applications require a revision because there is too much budgeted in the effective use of technology section. And as Layla mentioned earlier, no more than 15% of that budget for that section can be spent on devices or technology hardware or software. Thelma, can you talk to us about the release of funds?
Okay, so release of funds. The one thing I like about GMAP is that GMAP we have finally become full circle with GMAP, because historically the release of funds were only contingent upon the district funding assurances and the federal cash request assurances coming in. And we should have always waited until the district application was approved, whether it was, for Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, all those, whereas we did not. And this is the release of funds, in the federal statute. Edgar states that, we have to have an approvable application on file before we can release funds. So if the release of funds is contingent upon an approved application, which is in this case the consolidated application, which consists of Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, and Title V, and Title I Part D. So some districts may not receive all those funds, but the release of is based on the approved consolidated application. the submission of the district funding assurances, and the funding assurances is a two-step process. Next slide, Lee. The district funding assurances is a two-step process, and that has to be submitted by your district superintendent. So there's GMAP, where they go in and answer the questions for the district funding assurances, and then those district funding assurances have to be presented to the board. Once the board approves them, the superintendent has to complete a district funding assurances statement and upload that in GMAP after the board meeting. And then the third requirement for release of funds is the federal cash request assurances. And typically that document is submitted by the district finance officer. So once those three documents have been submitted, then the funds are released. So usually the one that takes the longest is the approval of the consolidated application, because usually that's one, the application usually has to go back based on the consultant reviews to make some revisions and everything. So those are the three items. Currently, superintendents are submitting their district funding assurances, the federal cash request assurances. Those are pretty much all in, because finance officers do a really good job about signing those and getting those back in and uploaded in GMAP. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in the budget, so your Title IV budget should be your munis budget should reflect the manner in which the funds are set up in GMAP. So if you have funds budgeted in each one of the 4 codes, your quarterly munis report, which your district finance officer submit, should reflect funds budgeted in each one of those codes. So when the quarterly report is submitted to KDE, we will receive under 552I, it will be 5 different reports that that last one will total whatever your award is for the district. So just make sure that the funds should be budgeted, set up in GMAP in the same manner which they are set up, which the funds have been budgeted in GMAP. Okay, next slide.
Okay, that kind of brings us to the end. So any other questions? I know there was one in the chat Thelma was going to address that Kate had followed up on. Thelma, do you want to go ahead and?
Yes, so if the contract is with the LLC, well then that is considered a subcontract, and you do not have to, that subcontractor does not have to keep time and effort.
Okay. And so before we get to our contact information, I am putting in the chat the link to the survey at the end for the ELA credit. Also, if you have your cell phones, there is a QR code on the screen, and you can use that to also take the survey. If you just scan it with your phone, it should pop up, or you can click the link, either one. So if anyone has additional questions, I'm going to leave this up for a second here to give people a chance to click or to grab their phones or to ask any questions. And the survey shouldn't take longer than about 3 minutes to access or to complete. It was just something quick. And what it does is it just kind of gives us a little bit of feedback on any sort of information that we may need to help support you guys. So we do want to thank you for attending today's session. And once you have completed the survey and everything, what we're going to do is we will send out ELA credit. It'll probably be later this week or early next week. We'll also be sending an email with the recording of the presentation along with the links and everything. So we do appreciate your feedback. It does help us to improve our content and support you in the future. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Lee with Title 4A questions, or Thelma with any federal budget questions. We do wish you all the best as you start up a new school year, and please let us know if we can help you out in any way. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm having difficulty